Hello, boys and girls. It is Thursday, November 19th. You know me, I am Mr. Farnworth, and I am absent yet again, but that's okay. We're going to have some fun today. We're moving forward into Ernest Hemingway short stories. You guys read A Day's Wait and A Cat in the Rain for homework, and I'm really excited about our class today and the conversations that we're going to have. We've done the dirty work of short stories, so to speak. We've talked about character, setting, conflict, point of view. We talked about the 5 steps to a dramatic structure that make up a short story. And now what I want to do is I want to make sure that I introduce you guys to some of my favorite authors and some of the most influential American authors of all time. I'm calling them the big boys. The 3 that we're going to study for the rest of this short story unit are Mark Twain, the first. Of course, you know him. He's on the back of our room. I talk about him all the time. The second is Kurt Vonnegut. He was born in 1922, died in 2007. He was a very satirical author. We're going to talk about him after we do, of course, Ernest Hemingway, born in 1899, died in 1961. 3 of my favorite authors of all time, and I'm so excited to talk about these guys. You have no idea. So our objective for today is this. I want to investigate both Ernest Hemingway's mastery of dialogue and his unique, innovative, and influential style through, of course, A Day's Wait and A Cat in the Rain. We're going to talk about dialogue and style today, and of course, to get us off and running with dialogue and style, I have a do now that I want you to complete in your writer's notebooks. Here's what you're going to do for me. I want you to write me a story, a short story. Make this only a paragraph or 2. But I want it to be about 2 people that you know very well. I'm thinking your parents, your friends from school, your teachers that you interact with every day. And I want you to write me a story about the 2 of those people having a conversation. The conversation can be about anything you want. Keep it appropriate, but make it between 2 people that you know very well. I do not want you to name these people. I do not want you to describe these people, and I do not want you to use any language that doesn't move the plot forward. So none of this flowery, descriptive stuff. I just want dialogue and language that moves the plot forward. Bring these 2 people to life using only the things they say and do. Introduce me to these 2 people, but don't describe them at all. That's your challenge for your do now. I want at least a paragraph, somewhere between 1 and 2 paragraphs in your writer's notebook. Pause this video and give yourself some time to do that right now. Of course, the reason that I had you do that do now is because of this unifying theory of 2 plus 2 that Andrew Stanton introduced us to. Instead of telling a story, you need to show your story. You can't tell me about your characters and all of their personality traits. It's much more effective to show it. And one of the best ways that you can show a character's personality and have it jump off the page is through dialogue. And this is the first definition I want you to get out in your handout. On your handout, make sure you copy down this definition. Dialogue is 2 or more characters engaged in conversation with one another. Of course, dialogue is separated by quotes. We all know what dialogue is. We all know how to use it in our own short stories. But dialogue is a really hard thing to master. Dialogue brings your story to life. Instead of your story just being static like The Legend of Sleepy Hollow with no dialogue, it makes your story jump off the page and brings your characters to life for us. It reveals personality of the characters, and it can also help reveal the spines of our characters or what motivates them throughout the entire text. Dialogue's probably the best way for us to meet characters, to introduce characters, and to learn about characters' personalities and the things that they care about. We can learn a lot about a person by simply looking at their dialogue. What I want you to do right now is I want you to turn and talk to the person sitting next to you. And I want you to take a look at these 3 quotes and tell me what can we learn about the person that speaks this dialogue. Here are your 3 quotes. The first one says, "Mr. Farnworth, you're such a savage. Coming to your class is so much fun." The second one says, Judging by the ventricular force that has been applied to the flux capacitor, I'd say we have about 4/37ths of an hour before it blows. The third one says, Michael grounded into a 4-6-3 double play to end the series. These are 3 lines of dialogue, and I want you to turn and talk to the person sitting next to you and tell me what you can learn about these people. What sort of qualities do they have? Who are these 3 people? What can you learn about them simply by analyzing the things that they say? I want you to pause this video and have that conversation right now. If we take a look at these 3 lines of dialogue, I think we can learn a lot about these people. For example, the first is clearly a 7th grader, probably a boy. I haven't heard many girls use the phrase savage. I usually get it from the boys in class. This person clearly likes English class and they think that Mr. F is the bomb, and I don't blame them, if I'm being honest. The second quote, judging by the ventricular force that has been applied to the flux capacitor, I'd say we have about 4/37ths of an hour before it blows. This person's clearly a scientist of some type, and they're clearly smarter than me. I took flux capacitor from Back to the Future, but everything else is pretty much made up. They're clearly smarter than me, and they're anxious about whatever is going to explode. They seem to be a little fragile, I would say, in this quote. And lastly, Michael grounded into a 4-6-3 double play to end the series. This person is clearly a baseball player or a coach, and they understand the game fairly well, that they know what a 4-6-3 double play is. In all 3 of these quotations, we're not told anything about the speaker, but we need to take this 2 + 2 and figure out what 4 is by making these connections by ourselves. I want to introduce you to this guy, Ernest Hemingway, who I call the American God of Dialogue. He is one of my favorite authors of all time, one of the greatest authors of all time, and is extremely influential in both his writing style and the way that he uses dialogue to illuminate his characters. Honestly, I have too much to say about Hemingway, and not all of it will fit into the box that PowerPoint is making me do. So I want to go to the internet. So let's go to the internet and see what we can learn about Ernest Hemingway. Taking a quick look at his Wikipedia page, tells us he was an American novelist, he wrote short stories, and he was a journalist. And this is important, we're going to come back to this idea. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1954, 7 novels, 6 short story collections, 2 nonfiction works. He was involved in World War I. He enlisted in the Italian front and joined the ambulance drivers, but he was seriously wounded and had to come home. He moved to Paris with his first wife, coined the phrase Lost Generation, which was a group of modernist writers in the 1920s. Published The Sun Also Rises, The Old Man and the Sea. I could go on and on and on and on and on. What I want you to do when you have free time is just come to Ernest Hemingway's Wikipedia page and see what you can learn about him. He was an amazing man and a really fascinating human being, and I think you guys would like learning his story a lot. The first story of his that I want to take a look at is A Day's Wait. So everybody should please pull out A Day's Wait right now. The setting of A Day's Wait is in a cold winter in a cabin very shortly after what's known as the influenza pandemic. This was in the year 1918 and 1919. Not many people know about this, but the influenza is another word for the flu. But back in the early 1900s, we didn't have the medicine that we have nowadays that could put the flu down in no time. So the influenza pandemic in 1919 actually killed more people than World War I did. This was a global catastrophe where people were getting the flu and passing away all over the world. Now what's happening in this story is we're getting dialogue between a father and a son, and they clearly have a misunderstanding here. What that misunderstanding is, I want you guys to go and find out. Your tasks for right now in using A Day's Wait is this. First, I want you to identify 3 lines of dialogue for each character, for the father and for the son, that teaches us something about the way that they think or feel. And I want you to answer this question about each of them. What characteristics can we learn about them through their words? Just by looking at the 3 lines of dialogue that you chose, what could we learn about the dad and what could we learn about the son? After you've done that, I want you to take a look at this paragraph. In this text, the father and son have a misunderstanding, like I just mentioned. I want you to try to identify this misunderstanding by analyzing the 2 lines of dialogue that I put in your worksheet. Take a look at those 2. We're going to have this conversation on Monday when I return, but I want you to try to do this right now. Work with a partner, work in a small group, work together as a team, and work your way through this short story. You should pause this video right now, take all the time you need to complete these 2 tasks, and then start this video once again, and we'll continue moving forward. Now, the second definition that I want to give you, and the second topic that I want to talk about today, is style. Style, the definition you should get down right now, is an author's technique. It is almost interchangeable with voice. Remember we talked about voice earlier in the year when we were doing poetry, and how voice is a combination of the author's word choice, his tone, and the point of view. Well, style is a little bit different. Style depends on the author's arrangement of words, their use of figurative language. The way that I would distinguish style from voice is this. Voice is like the person. I can't change that I'm Mr. Farnworth. My voice is Mr. Farnworth's voice. I can't change that. However, I can change my style. When I come to school, I'll wear a shirt and tie and be really dressed up. But when I'm outside of school, I may wear a t-shirt and sweatpants. I have a different style in one situation than I do in another situation. Style is the way that you dress up your words. I'm not sure if that was a great way of explaining style and how it's different from voice. So I found a pretty good article on Writer's Digest that I just want to take a quick look at with you guys. If I go back to the internet and click here, I think this man sums it up pretty well. He says this. Here's the breakdown. Voice is your own. It is a developed way of writing that sets you apart from other writers, hopefully. It's your personality coming through on the page by your language use and word choice. If we skip down, we see style is much broader than voice. Some writers have a writing style that's very ornate, long, complex, beautiful sentences packed with metaphors and imagery. Other people have a more straightforward style, sparse prose, simple sentences. Here's a good analogy that I think is a good way to think about it. He says, right here, Writer's Digest tries to have all its articles fit a similar style. It needs to be conversational yet straightforward. But between the covers, each piece is written by a different author whose voice colors his particular piece. So the continuity of the magazine stays together, but the piece is always different. So every author has their own voice, and every author can dress up his writing with a particular style. Style is what I want to talk about today. Now, Ernest Hemingway had a famous style. He was known for his style. And I want to take a look at it right now and see what we can do with it. There's 2 means of grammar that I want to make sure that we have clear before we dive into A Cat in the Rain together. And this is adjectives and adverbs. Stay with me because I promise you I'm going somewhere with this. Adjectives, we know, describe nouns. Words like colorful, friendly, entertaining, blue, intelligent. Describing words. Words that describe nouns, person, places, or things. Adverbs, on the other hand, describe verbs. So they're words like softly, jokingly, frequently, amazingly, dutifully. All words that describe action verbs. What we're going to do together right now is this. We're going to read the first 3 paragraphs of A Cat in the Rain, and as we go, I want you to circle any adjectives or adverbs that you see in Ernest Hemingway's writing. And then you're going to write the number on your handout. So together, I'm going to go to it right now. We're going to read the first 3 paragraphs together, and I want you to circle any adjectives or adverbs that you see. So let's try this right now. If I go back to the internet and I go to A Cat in the Rain, and I zoom in a little bit, let's take a look at these first 3 paragraphs. There were only 2 Americans stopping at the hotel. They did not know any of the people they passed on the stairs on their way to and from their room. Their room was on the 2nd floor facing the sea. It also faced the public garden and the war monument. There were big palms and green benches in the public garden. In the good weather, there was always an artist with his easel. Artists liked the way the palms grew and the bright colors of the hotels facing the gardens and the sea. Italians came from a long way off to look up at the war monument. It was made of bronze and glistened in the rain. It was raining. The rain dripped from the palm trees. Water stood in pools on the gravel paths. The sea broke in a long line in the rain and slipped back down the beach to come up and break again in a long line in the rain. The motor cars were gone from the square by the war monument. Across the square in the doorway of the cafe, a waiter stood looking out at the empty square. Take a minute right now to go circle all the adjectives or adverbs that you can find. You can pause this video to do it. Now, as I glance through these first 3 paragraphs, I do not see many adjectives and adverbs. I see big palms, I see green benches, I see public garden, I see good weather, I see bright colors, and then when I get down here, I only see empty square is probably my last descriptive word. So we have big, green, public, bright, good, and empty. I count 6. Maybe you found 1 or 2 more. That's totally fine. There aren't many adjectives and adverbs in this writing style. It is specifically nouns and verbs. Things that move the story forward and move the plot forward, just like we did in our Do Now. Now, the reason why Hemingway sort of writes in this really matter-of-fact noun and verb writing style is because of his career as a journalist. Of course, we all know it is hard to make a living as a writer. When you have to send out short stories to publications, they send you back a check if they want to accept your publication, but it's a really hard way to make an honest living. So Hemingway, even though he's one of the greatest authors of all time, also worked in journalism. In his early life, he worked for the Kansas City Star. Then after World War I, he worked for the Toronto Star. And he was writing articles for these magazines, for these newspapers. His writing style is known as the iceberg theory. At the tip of our iceberg, we have what we read. Ernest Hemingway does not give us many details about his characters or the events that are taking place. He simply puts us in a scene and lets us watch what unfolds. He doesn't give us much up here as far as what we read, but what exists underneath the surface is something much bigger. Even though we don't necessarily get a lot of words on the page, there is a lot beneath the surface that we need to make sure that we're paying attention to. Every word on the page means something. Every image and phrase is there for a reason. Hemingway does not waste his words. And I want you to keep that in mind as we move forward to read A Cat in the Rain from 1925. To set the scene for you, I'd say this. A couple is vacationing in Italy, and they're in their hotel room. There's 2 people. There's George and his American wife. We don't have her name. She's just the American wife. What she does is she spots a cat in the rain outside of their hotel room and wants to go rescue it. That right there is pretty much it. That's pretty much all that happens. But what you guys need to do is make sure you take a deep look at the conversation between George and his American wife and see if you can sense anything that's going on beneath the surface. As you read A Cat in the Rain, here's what I want you to do. Like I mentioned, I want you to pay attention to the conversations between George and his wife. On your handout, I want you to jot down descriptive adjectives about them and try to figure out what's going on beneath the surface. They're having a conversation with one another, but there's something else there, clearly. And I want you to see what you can learn about them just by their conversation in the short sentences that Ernest Hemingway gives us. Lastly, I want you to answer the question that I give you at the bottom of the page. Your homework for tonight is to bring everything you need to continue writing your short stories in class tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm going to give you some time to work on your short stories. I want you to bring all the materials that we've accumulated over time. We're going to finish talking about A Day's Wait and A Cat in the Rain on Monday when I make my triumphant return, which I am really looking forward to. But right now, until the end of class, you should be doing this. Reread A Cat in the Rain, jot down your descriptive adjectives, answer the question at the bottom of the page. Good luck with this. These are two really great stories. I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. I can't wait to talk about them on Monday. I hope you guys have a great rest of your Thursday. Stay tuned for another short video tomorrow to really get you off and running on your short stories. And then I'll see you there.